He glanced at her name tag, then at her dark skin. Then he smirked. To William Hart, the black waitress in front of him was not a person. She was a target. He switched to fast, formal Korean, loaded with old phrases and complicated words, right there in front of everyone. He thought his money and his Korean blood made him untouchable. He thought the black waitress would freeze, stumble. He'd prove every ugly thing he believed about people like her. He had no idea what was coming. What he did not know was that the woman holding his menu was far more than a waitress. The words she was about to say, in his own language, would not just embarrass him. They would bring down everything he had built. This is the story of the night pride met its match. The air inside Hanok House, Chicago's most expensive Korean fine dining restaurant, it smelled of doenjang, imported soju, and old money. For Serafina Blake, however, it mostly smelled of desperation. She adjusted the collar of her black uniform shirt, smoothing down a wrinkle that kept coming back no matter how many times she pressed it flat. The shirt was borrowed from another server, 2 sizes too big, because her own had torn at the seam 5 days ago, and she could not afford to replace it yet. Rent was due Tuesday. It was Saturday at 9 p.m., and the dinner rush was at its absolute worst. Clinking glasses, quiet conversations about acquisitions, market returns, and investment portfolios. Laughter that cost more per minute than Serafina earned in a full hour. This was not her world, but it was the world keeping her mother alive. Table 3 needs their second course. Table 7 wants the manager. Move, Blake. Nay, move. The command came from Jasper Holt, the floor manager. Jasper was a man who believed that looking tired at work was a personal weakness. He was standing near the host podium, straightening a flower arrangement that was already perfect, his eyes sharp and unforgiving. "On it, Jasper," Serafina said, keeping her voice level and her eyes down. She lifted a tray of delicate appetizers and ignored the burning pain shooting from her left heel all the way up through her calf. 12 hours on her feet. Her shoes, plain black non-slip sneakers held together with super glue and sheer determination, bought from a clearance rack in Oak Park, were falling apart beneath her. The sole on the right one had started to separate completely. Serafina Blake was 29 years old. To every single person dining at Hanok House that night, she was invisible. She was the hand that placed the food, the voice that described the menu, the body that absorbed their impatience without a single word of complaint. They did not see the exhaustion she carefully hid behind red lipstick and drugstore concealer. They did not see her checking her phone desperately during every break, waiting for updates from the oncology unit. They certainly did not know that 3 years ago, Serafina had been a doctoral candidate in financial economics at Georgetown University, one of the most gifted emerging scholars in her field, before the diagnosis came. Stage 3 leukemia. Her mother, Arabella Blake, the woman who had cleaned offices from midnight to dawn and worked retail during the day just to keep Serafina in school, now needed her daughter. Serafina had withdrawn from Georgetown that same week. She traded the research library for a serving tray, academic conferences for double shifts, research grants for cash tips she counted carefully every single night. She did what she had to do. Every dollar went to the private oncology unit in Evanston. $15,000 a month for the experimental treatment that was actually working. The treatment that was keeping her mother alive. Blake. Jasper's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. VIP party. Table 1. Prime spot. Do not mess this up. Serafina looked toward the entrance. Dominic, the host, still in training, was bowing slightly as a group walked through the front door. The man came in first. That told her everything. He was dressed in a Brioni suit that probably cost more than Serafina's yearly rent. His dark hair was styled with cold precision, not one strand out of place. He had the kind of face that photographed well, sharp features, calculating eyes that swept the room not to admire it, but to measure it, to find out who was watching, who recognized him, who mattered. His Audemars Piguet watch caught the light as he snapped his fingers at Dominic without a single word. Dominic was not worth words. This was William Hart, CEO of Hart Capital Group, a billion-dollar financial firm known not for brilliant investing, but for ruthless takeovers and its founder's legendary arrogance. Korean American, second generation, born into money and absolutely convinced it made him superior to everyone around him. Behind him came three others, a man in a navy suit whose smile never reached his eyes, and two associates in expensive clothes who had the anxious, frightened energy of people terrified of disappointing their boss. Serafina took a breath. She smoothed her borrowed shirt. She slipped her phone into her apron pocket, the screen still showing her mother's treatment schedule for the following week. She caught her own reflection in the polished steel of the kitchen pass. A strong black woman stared back at her, hair pulled into a neat, elegant bun that had taken 3 attempts and an entire can of hairspray to hold in place. The professional mask was perfect. The desperation hiding underneath it was almost invisible. Almost. Just get through this table, she told herself. The payment is due Monday. Mom's birthday is Thursday. You have survived worse than this. You can do this. She walked toward table 1, her face composed, and her mask firmly in place. She had no idea that the next 15 minutes were about to change everything. The restaurant felt different up close. The soft Korean music playing through the speakers, the gentle clink of expensive glassware, the low hum of privileged conversation, all of it faded into the background the moment Serafina reached table 1. Everything narrowed down to this. This table, this man, this moment. Hanok House smelled of doenjang, imported soju, and old money. But underneath all of that careful elegance, Serafina could smell something else entirely. Her own fear, sharp and cold and metallic at the back of her throat. She caught her reflection in the polished steel surface of the kitchen pass as she walked by. A strong black woman stared back at her, hair pulled into a neat, elegant bun that had taken 3 separate attempts and an entire can of hairspray to hold in place. The professional mask was perfect. The desperation hiding underneath it was invisible. Almost invisible. Jasper was watching her from across the room again. That same cold, calculating look that said he was quietly deciding whether she was still worth keeping on the floor. Serafina's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the soju cups on her tray. She could not afford to be watched. She could not afford to be noticed. And she absolutely could not afford to lose this job. She straightened her back. She lifted her chin. She walked toward table 1. William Hart was already looking at her before she even arrived. His eyes found her from across the room and dismissed her in the same single second. He spread his arms across the back of the booth like a man who had never once been asked to make room for anyone else. His Audemars Piguet watch caught the warm light of the dining room as he leaned back, completely relaxed, completely in control, or so he believed. "Good evening and welcome to Hanok House," Serafina said, her voice warm and steady and giving nothing away. "My name is Serafina and I will be looking after you tonight. May I start by telling you about our—" "I wonder," William said loudly, cutting her off completely, turning to look at the man in the navy suit beside him as though Serafina had not spoken at all. "Whether a restaurant like this actually hires people who genuinely understand Korean culture." His eyes moved back to her. Slowly, deliberately. They moved across her face, across her skin, and they stayed there just a moment too long. "It seems like a rather unusual choice for an establishment of this standard," he said. The words floated over the table like smoke that would not clear. The man in the navy suit shifted uncomfortably. One of the two associates looked down at his menu. Nobody said anything. Serafina's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed perfectly steady. "Our soju selection features pairings from 6 different regions of Korea. May I walk you through the options and suggest something for this evening?" "Let me stop you right there." William raised one hand slowly. Authentic Korean culture is not something that can be properly understood by... He paused, gesturing vaguely in her direction, his eyes moving deliberately across her uniform, her shoes, the peeling sole. "Someone like you." The words landed hard, but Serafina did not move. She breathed. She stayed exactly where she was. She came back 10 minutes later carrying a beautifully arranged platter of Korean appetizers. Crispy pajeon, carefully portioned banchan, a steaming stone bowl of doenjang jjigae. She had taken extra care with every detail of the presentation. It was absolutely flawless. William looked at it for 2 seconds. Then he pushed the entire platter to the very edge of the table with the back of his hand. "This," he announced, loudly enough for the tables on either side of them to hear every single word, "is a complete insult to Korean cuisine. Take it away." Around them, heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones appeared from pockets and purses, tilting carefully toward their table. When Serafina understood in that moment, with complete and ice-cold certainty, that this was never just about the food. He was not simply being difficult. He was performing. The entire dining room had become his personal stage, and she was the only act. "Do you speak any Korean?" William asked. His smile had sharpened into something dangerous. Serafina felt the shape of the trap closing around her before she could fully see its edges. "I am happy to help you with anything on the menu, sir," she said quietly. "That is not what I asked." He leaned back further, arms folding across his chest, his voice rising just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Let me guess. 안녕. 감사합니다. Perhaps you have watched a few Korean dramas on television. Yeah, picked up a word or two from a streaming show." Nervous laughter came from the two associates. The man in the navy suit stared at the table. "I am quite sure they did not cover Korean culture at..." William paused again. His eyes dropped slowly and deliberately to her shoes, to the separated sole, to the superglue. He let the silence stretch and stretch until it was almost unbearable. "Where was it that you studied exactly? A community college somewhere?" The words hit like open hands across the face. Every conversation in the surrounding area had died completely. Every phone was now pointed directly at their table. This was no longer a dinner. This was entertainment. And Serafina was the only one in the room not being compensated for it. Her fingers gripped her notepad so tightly that the metal spiral pressed a sharp, deep line into the center of her palm. She thought of her mother's text from that very morning. "Feeling a little stronger today, my love. Please do not worry about me." She thought of the $1,200 she still needed. The payment due Monday. No exceptions. "I would be very happy to have our manager come and assist you this evening," Serafina said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, giving absolutely nothing away. "No, no." William waved his hand dismissively. "You will do perfectly fine. Allow me to make this very simple for you." And then he switched languages. The Korean that poured from his mouth was fast, deliberate, and extraordinarily complex. He used the highest levels of Jondamal, the most formal Korean honorific system, the kind that most second-generation Korean Americans raised in Houston suburbs had never once attempted in their lives. He spoke at speed, weaving his order together with deep Goryeo dynasty culinary references, demanding a very specific preparation of premium Hanwoo beef, with a regional pairing that required intimate knowledge of ancient Korean agricultural traditions. But that was not the worst part. In the middle of his elaborate order, William slipped in casually, still in Korean, his smile never changing. The staff in restaurants like this never even attempt to learn the culture properly. They just smile and nod, like trained animals. One of his associates went completely still. William continued, his voice smooth and easy, still in Korean. What do you honestly expect from someone like her? She probably cannot even read the menu. William. The man in the navy suit spoke through his teeth, his voice low and strained. That is completely unnecessary. Please just order in English. If she chooses to work in a Korean fine dining restaurant, William said, switching back to English with a relaxed and easy smile, then understanding the basics of the culture she is serving should be considered the absolute minimum standard of professional competence. He leaned back, arms crossed, completely satisfied. He was waiting for exactly what he had planned for from the very beginning. The confused expression, the stammering, the embarrassed call for the manager, the slow, complete, and total humiliation he had engineered carefully from the moment he walked through the front door of Hanok House. The restaurant was absolutely silent now. Every single eye in the room was on Serafina Blake, and something inside her, something she had buried deep beneath 3 years of exhaustion, fear, and pure survival, suddenly and quietly caught fire. She looked at William Hart. She really, truly looked at him. And then Serafina Blake opened her mouth, and the entire temperature of the room shifted. She did not stammer. She did not look away. She did not call for the manager or reach for her notepad or do any of the things that William Hart had carefully planned for her to do. She simply straightened. Not the small, careful adjustment of someone trying to appear professional. This was something else entirely. This was the full, unhurried transformation of a woman remembering exactly who she was. Her chin lifted, her shoulders rolled back, and when her eyes locked onto William Hart's eyes, they were no longer the eyes of a waitress. They were the eyes of a scholar, precise, calm, and absolutely deadly. When she spoke, every trace of the soft, careful, accommodating tone was completely gone. In its place was something that made the air itself hold its breath. She spoke in Korean, but not William Hart's Korean. "Honored guest," she began, her voice carrying across the silent dining room of Hanok House, with the kind of crystalline precision that belonged in a lecture hall, not a restaurant. And the words that followed were Joseon Dynasty Royal Court Korean, the kind spoken by aristocrats and scholars 500 years ago, woven together seamlessly with the most complex and formal levels of gendarmerie. Your use of the informal address form, in a context that clearly requires the formal honorific structure, suggests a significant unfamiliarity with proper gendarmerie, she continued, her tone carrying the perfect and devastating blend of courtesy and academic condescension. This is a common error among those who acquired Korean as a heritage language at home rather than through rigorous formal academic study. William Hart's smile did not fade gradually. It stopped. Completely. Like a light that had been switched off. Furthermore, Serafina continued, not pausing, not hesitating, not giving him even a single second to recover. The Hanwoo beef preparation you have requested using mid-Goryeo dynasty culinary terminology would be historically inaccurate for this particular grade of meat. The specific cattle cultivation methods you referenced did not exist until significantly later in the Joseon period. She tilted her head to one side with a small, composed smile that could have cut clean through glass. But perhaps you were speaking metaphorically. Perhaps you would prefer that I explain the menu to you in simpler and more accessible language." The silence in the restaurant was absolute and total. Somewhere behind Serafina, a fork slipped from someone's fingers and rang out against a porcelain plate like a small bell. "And regarding the observation you made earlier about the staff," Serafina's voice dropped. Not in volume, in temperature. It became something quiet and precise and completely without mercy. "I understood every single word. Every single one." She let that land. "Your accent places you firmly in second-generation Korean American, Houston suburban if I am not mistaken. Your pitch patterns and your vowel formations are quite distinctly Texan in origin. Your exposure to native Korean speakers has clearly been—" She paused, searching briefly for exactly the right word, finding it, delivering it with a serene and unhurried smile. "Limited." Nobody in the entire restaurant made a sound. The head chef, a Korean man named Mr. Bae who had worked in fine dining kitchens for over 20 years, had come out of the kitchen at some point during all of this. He was standing completely still near the kitchen door with his mouth open. Around the dining room, and phones were no longer being hidden. They were raised openly now. Everyone was recording. Everyone. William Hart's face moved through expressions the way a broken machine cycles through settings it can no longer control. Confusion first. Then the slow and horrible dawn of recognition. Then realization. And then, rising up through all of it like something ugly surfacing from deep water. Pure and absolute rage. The man in the navy suit leaned slowly toward one of the associates and whispered something. But the restaurant was so completely silent that everyone heard it perfectly clearly. "She just took him apart," he said. William's hands were shaking. His face had moved from pale to a deep, burning crimson. He pushed back from the table so hard that his chair scraped violently across the floor, and the sound tearing through the silence like something breaking. "You—" His voice cracked in the middle of the single word. He stopped. Started again. "You have absolutely no idea who you are talking to." Serafina looked at him. She held his gaze steadily and without flinching. And in that moment, with complete and ice-cold clarity, she understood exactly what she had just done. She had humiliated a billionaire. In public. On camera. In front of every single person in that room. The adrenaline that had carried her through every word began to drain away, and what rushed in to replace it was something far colder. What have I done? The panic arrived like ice water poured directly into her chest. Her hands began to tremble at her sides. The dining room that had felt so still and suspended just moments ago was now buzzing. Whispers moving between tables, phones still recording. The electric and dangerous energy of a crowd that had just witnessed something extraordinary and was not yet sure how it would end. Jasper appeared at her elbow without warning. His face was completely drained of color. His hand closed around her arm, not gently, and he pulled her firmly toward the corridor that led to the kitchen. "Do you have any idea?" he said, his voice dropping to a sharp and furious whisper. "Who that man is?" Serafina said nothing. "William Hart." Jasper's grip tightened. "Hart Capital Group. The firm is worth over $2 billion. $2 billion. He keeps an entire legal team on retainer. They do not just sue people, Serafina. They destroy them. They do it for sport. Jasper, I do not care what he was doing." Jasper's voice was shaking now. "Go to the prep kitchen. Stay completely out of sight. If he asks to speak to the manager, you are already finished here. Do you understand me? You are already gone." Serafina stumbled through the kitchen doors. The prep area was cold and bright and smelled of steel and dish soap. She leaned against the counter, her palms flat against the cool surface, her own reflection looking back at her from the polished metal. Distorted, stretched, barely recognizable. 3 years ago, she had had an office, small and cramped and absolutely full of books and research papers and the particular smell of a place where serious work was being done. A small plant on the windowsill that she had somehow kept alive through 2 Chicago winters. A nameplate on the door that read Serafina Blake, doctoral candidate, financial economics, Georgetown University. Her dissertation, Power Asymmetry and Capital Allocation in Emerging Korean Markets, had created a genuine bidding war among institutions. Seoul National University had called twice. Princeton had written a formal letter. The International Finance and Economics Summit had invited her to present before she had even finished writing. Then had come the phone call. Miss Blake, this is the oncology unit at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. We have your mother's results. I am afraid it is stage 3 leukemia. We need to begin treatment immediately. Her dissertation defense had been scheduled for that same Friday. She had withdrawn on Monday. The choice had not felt like a choice at all. Insurance covered 60%. 60% of leukemia treatment still left $15,000 every single month for the experimental protocol that was keeping Arabella Blake alive. Academic research paid in prestige and future promises. Fine dining paid in cash. Her mother had wept when Serafina told her, "Baby, please, do not give up everything you have built. Not for me." "You are everything I have built, Mama," Serafina had whispered back. "Everything else can wait." But men like William Hart looked at her and saw nothing. They looked at her and saw a uniform and a serving tray, and a pair of shoes held together with superglue. They had never once in their lives been forced to choose between their dream and the person they loved most in the world. They had never sacrificed anything real. They had never had to. The prep kitchen door swung open hard. Jasper stood in the doorway. But this time his face was not just pale. It was frightened. Genuinely, deeply frightened. "He is asking for you," Jasper said. His voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "And he is already on the phone to his lawyers." Serafina stared at him. "He is claiming you tampered with his food." The words did not make sense at first. Serafina stood completely still, her hands flat against the cold steel counter of the prep kitchen, and stared at Jasper. "What?" she said. "He told his lawyers he watched you do something to his plate at the kitchen pass before it went out." Jasper was sweating now, his hands visibly trembling at his sides. "He is threatening to call the health department. He is threatening to call the media. He is saying you poisoned him, out of revenge," for being corrected. The floor tilted beneath Serafina's feet. Poisoned. Not harassment. Not a formal complaint. Not even a bad review. Poisoned. That was a criminal accusation. That was arrest. That was a record that would follow her for the rest of her life, closing every door, burning every bridge, making it impossible to ever return to academia or to any position that mattered. And it would end her mother's treatment immediately. Arabella Blake would be moved from the private oncology unit in Evanston to a county facility within days. The experimental protocol would stop. The doctors had been clear about what that meant. 6 months, maybe less, without the medication. William Hart was not trying to humiliate her anymore. He had moved past humiliation entirely. He was trying to erase her, not to destroy her so completely that she could never rise again. All because she had refused to be the ignorant, stammering victim he had decided she was supposed to be. Isabel, one of the line cooks, a quiet woman who had worked the kitchen pass all evening, stepped forward and grabbed Serafina's arm. Her eyes were fierce and absolutely certain. "I was at that pass the entire night," Isabel said, her voice low and firm. "Every single second. I watched every plate that went out, He is lying. I will tell them. I will stand up and say exactly what I saw." Serafina looked at this woman, this mother of 3 children who rode 2 separate buses to get to work every single day, who could not afford to lose this job any more than Serafina could, who was offering to put everything she had on the line for someone she barely knew. "You have children, Isabel," Serafina said quietly, squeezing her hand tightly. "You cannot risk this. But thank you. I mean that." She turned toward the small bathroom at the back of the prep area. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at her own face for a long moment, exhausted, terrified, but still hers. Still completely and entirely hers. She straightened her uniform. She smoothed her hair. She washed the visible fear from her face as carefully and thoroughly as she could. And then she heard her mother's voice in her head, as clearly as if Arabella Blake were standing in that small bathroom right beside her. "Never let them take your dignity, baby. That is the only thing in this world that truly belongs to you. They cannot touch it. They cannot take it. Not unless you hand it to them yourself." Serafina took one long, slow breath. Then she pushed through the kitchen doors and walked back out into the dining room. William Hart was standing in the very center of Hannock House. His phone was in his hand, raised like a weapon. His face was twisted with the particular expression of a man who had confused his own cruelty for righteousness and was now fully committed to it. "I want her removed from this building immediately," William said, his voice carrying across the entire silent restaurant like a gunshot. "And I want the police called. Right now. This woman tampered with my food. I watched her do it with my own eyes in that kitchen." "William, stop it." The man in the navy suit was on his feet now, his voice strained and desperate. "You have not even touched the food. You have not eaten a single thing. Oi, this is completely insane, and every single person in this room is recording it." "I saw her." William's face was crimson, the veins at his temples visibly raised. "She is vindictive. Look at her. She is angry because I exposed her as a complete fraud." He turned to Jasper, who looked as though he might genuinely faint where he stood. "Call the police," William said. "Call the health department. Call my legal team. Do it right now." Around them, every single phone in the restaurant was raised and recording openly. The entire dining room had become a courtroom, and Serafina Blake was already standing in the dock. Jasper opened his mouth. No sound came out. Serafina stepped forward. Her legs felt like water beneath her, but she kept her spine straight and her chin level, and she walked forward until she was standing in the center of the room facing William Hart directly. "I did not tamper with your food, Mr. Hart," she said. Her voice was quiet and steady, and gave nothing away. "And you know that. You know that perfectly well." "Oh, I know it, do I?" William laughed. It was a cruel sound, sharp and hollow, and completely without humor. "People like you always think you can behave any way you choose and then play the innocent victim afterward, make everyone else look like the problem." The phrase hung in the air like something toxic. "People like you." A ripple of audible gasps moved through the crowd. "You are a liar, Mr. Hart," Serafina said. Quietly, clearly, without anger and without apology. "And you are a thief, not of money, of dignity. You came into this restaurant tonight with the deliberate intention of humiliating me in front of every person in this room. And when you discovered that I was not the person you had decided I was, you chose to try and destroy me instead." William stepped forward, closing the distance between them aggressively, his entire body radiating the particular fury of a man who had never once in his life been spoken to this way. "You need to be very, very careful right now," he said, his voice dropping to something low and threatening. I will bury you in litigation. I will take everything you have. I will make sure you never work anywhere that matters for as long as you live." Serafina looked at him. She really, truly looked at him. And somewhere deep inside her chest, she felt something shift, and something that had been clenched tight for 3 years, slowly and quietly released. "Mr. Hart," she said softly, "I already lost everything. 3 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me, and I rebuilt myself from nothing, one shift at a time, $1 at a time, for someone I love." She held his gaze without blinking. You cannot threaten a person with losing what they have already survived losing. For one single moment, something moved across William Hart's face, something that might almost have been uncertainty. But then the smile came back, sharper than before, colder than before. He had made his calculations. He was a billionaire with a legal team on retainer, and she was a waitress in broken shoes. He thought he had already won. He had made one fatal and catastrophic assumption. He thought she was alone. From the far corner of the restaurant, a chair scraped slowly and deliberately across the floor. The sound cut through the noise and the chaos, and the charged and electric atmosphere of the room like a single clean note. Every head turned. An elderly Korean gentleman rose from his seat, slowly, unhurriedly, with the particular stillness of someone who had never once needed to raise his voice to command the complete attention of every person in a room. He was small in stature, impeccably dressed in a suit that was understated and quietly, unmistakably expensive. The kind of wealth that had absolutely nothing to prove. He began to walk forward, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, but it carried the weight of something immovable. "That," he said, "will be quite enough, Mr. Hart." William turned, irritation flashing across his face at the interruption. "This does not concern you," he said. "Whoever you are, I suggest you sit back down and—" "My name," the elderly gentleman said, switching to formal and flawless Korean, his voice carrying across the silent room with absolute precision, "is Dr. James Holden, and you will show respect." William Hart stopped breathing. The color left his face so completely and so rapidly that it was visible from across the room, like water draining from a broken glass. That name. In Korean financial circles, in investment boardrooms, in the offices of every major institution from Chicago to Seoul, there was not a single person who did not know that name. Dr. James Holden, founder and chairman of Holden Global Partners, one of the most powerful and respected figures in international finance, a man whose decisions moved markets. Dr. Holden switched back to English. His tone was almost pleasant. "I have been sitting in this restaurant for the past 2 hours, Mr. Hart," he said. "I have heard everything. I have seen everything." He raised his phone calmly. "And I have recorded everything." He pressed play. The video filled the silence of the dining room. William Hart's voice, William Hart's words, the Korean insults he had been absolutely certain no one around him could understand. The racist remarks delivered with a smile. The performance of cruelty captured in perfect, unforgiving, high-definition clarity. William's mouth opened. No words came. "Meridian Capital Holdings," Dr. Holden said, his voice remaining almost conversational, "which is a subsidiary of Holden Global Partners, holds a 35% stake in Hart Capital Group. We currently occupy 2 seats on your board of directors." William Hart swayed where he stood, as though the ground beneath him had shifted. "I will be contacting the remaining board members tonight," Dr. Holden continued, "to convene an emergency meeting first thing Monday morning. The sole item on the agenda will be your immediate removal as Chief Executive Officer of Hart Capital Group." "No." William's voice came out broken, barely recognizable. please. If I am removed, the firm will collapse. Everything will... The firm will be perfectly fine, Dr. Holden said simply. It is you who will not. He lowered his phone. I will also be ensuring that this recording reaches Bloomberg, Forbes, and every major financial publication before tomorrow morning. It was a misunderstanding, William said. His voice was barely a whisper now. It was racism, Dr. Holden said. It was deliberate cruelty. It was the behavior of a small and frightened man wearing very expensive clothing. The man in the navy suit stood up from the table. He looked at William for a long moment. Then he picked up his jacket and walked away without a single word. The two associates followed immediately. William. The voice came from across the room. Nathaniel, who had sat completely silent through everything, rose from his seat. His face was unreadable. We are finished. Completely and permanently finished. He walked directly to Serafina and pressed a business card firmly into her hand. Call me, he said quietly. We people with your ability and your courage do not belong in places that treat them like this. William Hart stood alone in the center of Hannock House. His empire was crumbling in real time, right there in front of every camera and every witness in that room. I will resign, he said. The words came out hollow and defeated. I will resign quietly. Just please, please do not. You will resign publicly, Dr. Holden said, with a full and unreserved written apology, and you will make a substantial financial donation to organizations working to dismantle racism in corporate and financial spaces. Those are the terms. They are not negotiable. William nodded. He could not look at anyone. Now, Dr. Holden said pleasantly, please leave. William Hart, CEO of Hart Capital Group, second-generation Korean-American, born into wealth and convinced it made him untouchable, walked out of Hannock House. The restaurant erupted. The applause started at one table and spread across the entire dining room in seconds, rising until it filled every corner of the space. People were on their feet. Some were laughing. Some were wiping their eyes. The head chef, Mr. Bay, was clapping from the kitchen doorway, shaking his head slowly with a wide and disbelieving smile. And Serafina Blake stood in the center of all of it, her broken shoes on the floor of Chicago's most expensive Korean fine dining restaurant, and felt the tears coming before she could stop them. Dr. Holden walked to her. He spoke in Korean, formal, warm, precise. You are Serafina Blake, he said, author of Power Asymmetry and Capital Allocation in Emerging Korean Markets. Serafina's entire world tilted on its axis. You, her voice came out barely above a whisper. You know my work? I have known your work for a very long time, Dr. Holden said. I funded your doctoral studies at Georgetown through an anonymous research grant. When you disappeared 3 years ago, I searched for you. It took me considerably longer to find you than I would have liked. The tears that had been building broke completely. I had to leave, Serafina said. My mother... I know, Dr. Holden said. And what you did was not weakness. What you did was the most honorable thing a person can do. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small cream-colored card. The Holden Economic Foundation has been looking for a director of economic research for some time now. The base salary is $210,000 annually, with a full research budget and complete medical benefits. He paused. Your mother can be transferred to Northwestern Memorial Hospital immediately. Full coverage. Every treatment. No exceptions. His eyes were kind and certain and absolutely serious. Your mother raised a truly remarkable woman, Miss Blake, he said. Allow us to make sure she lives to see you become everything you were always meant to be. Serafina broke. She wept openly, right there in the middle of Hanak House. 3 years of exhaustion and fear and grief and love and survival all releasing at once, pouring out of her in the middle of a restaurant full of strangers who had just witnessed something none of them would ever forget. And for the first time in 3 years, the tears were not from pain. They were from hope. The research office at the Holden Economic Foundation was something Serafina Blake could not have imagined from the floor of Hannock House. Not in her most private and carefully guarded dreams. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Millennium Park. Shelves lined with financial texts. Economic journals and research papers in 6 languages. The particular and sacred quiet of a place where serious and important work was being done every single day. Morning light falling in long, warm columns across a desk covered in papers written in her own handwriting. The nameplate on the desk read, Dr. and Serafina Blake, Director of Economic Research. She wore a tailored blazer that actually fit. Her hair was styled with care and without urgency. The dark circles that had lived beneath her eyes for 3 years were gone. She looked like herself again. Or perhaps, for the very first time, she looked like the person she had always been underneath everything that had been piled on top of her. Her dissertation, Power Asymmetry and Capital Allocation in Emerging Korean Markets, was being published the following month by Georgetown University Press. The International Finance and Economics Summit had invited her to deliver the keynote address in Seoul. 3 separate universities had already reached out about collaborative research partnerships. The life she had believed was gone forever had not disappeared at all. It had simply been waiting. Dr. Blake? Thomas appeared in the doorway of her office, his expression professional and bright. You have a visitor. Serafina looked up from her desk, and Arabella Blake walked in. Not the frail and frightened woman Serafina had last seen in the oncology ward in Evanston. Not the gray and exhausted ghost who had wept and told her daughter not to give up her dreams. This was someone else entirely. This was Arabella Blake restored. Her hair was growing back in beautiful silver curls. There was color in her cheeks and warmth in her eyes, and a steadiness in her stride that Serafina had not seen in 3 long years. The experimental treatment at Northwestern Memorial Hospital had worked. The doctors had used the word remission. Arabella's eyes moved slowly around the office, across the diplomas on the wall, across the published research papers in their frames, across the books and the journals and the morning light and the nameplate on the desk. Her daughter's name. Finally. Exactly where it belonged. Her eyes filled. Look at you, baby, Arabella said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just look at what you have become. Serafina was already on her feet, already crossing the room, already crying before she even reached her mother. Look at what we have become, Mama, she said, wrapping her arms around her. We did this together, every single bit of it. I never doubted you, Arabella whispered into her daughter's shoulder. Not for 1 single second, not even on the hardest days. I never once doubted you. You taught me, Serafina said softly, pulling back just enough to look at her mother's face. You taught me that dignity is not something that is given to you. It is not something that can be taken away either. It is already yours. It has always been yours. Nobody can touch it unless you hand it to them yourself. And you never handed it to them, baby, Arabella said. Even when that man tried everything in his power to take it from you, you never let go of it, not for 1 single moment. They held each other in the quiet morning light of the office, both of them weeping. Not from pain, not from fear, not from exhaustion or desperation or the particular grief of watching your own life move further and further from where you always believed it was supposed to be. They wept from joy, pure and overwhelming and long overdue. Across the city, in a small and cramped middle management office that smelled of stale coffee and regret. William Hart sat alone in front of a computer screen. The headline on the screen read, "Former Georgetown prodigy Dr. Serafina Blake, named Director of Economic Research at prestigious Holden Economic Foundation." Beneath it was her photograph. Tailored blazer, confident eyes, the nameplate visible on the desk behind her. His firm was gone. His reputation was ash. His name, which had once opened every door in every financial boardroom in the country, now opened nothing. Bloomberg and Forbes had run the story within hours of that night. The video had been seen by millions of people before the following morning. The board had convened on Monday exactly as Dr. Holden had promised. The vote had been unanimous. William Hart had done this to himself, not with one bad decision, not with one moment of weakness, but with a lifetime of believing that his money made him better than the people around him, with the accumulated weight of every cruelty he had ever performed for an audience, with the arrogance of a man who had never once been shown what it looked like when the person he had chosen as his target turned out to be the most formidable individual in the room. He stared at her photograph for a long time. Then he closed the laptop. 6 months after that night at Hannock House, Serafina Blake stood on a stage in Chicago beneath a single bright light, in front of an audience of over 2,000 people, and delivered a TED Talk on financial inclusion and the power of knowledge to both oppress and liberate entire communities. She spoke clearly. She spoke without notes. She spoke with the particular authority of someone who had lived every single word of what she was saying. In the very front row sat Arabella Blake. She was wearing a dress Serafina had bought her with her very first paycheck from the Holden Economic Foundation. It was a deep, rich blue. Arabella sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on her daughter, and a smile on her face that had not left from the moment she sat down. She did not take her eyes off Serafina once, and somewhere near the back of the auditorium, in a seat that had not been announced or reserved or listed on any program, Dr. James Holden sat quietly with his hands folded and watched the stage. He was smiling. He had known from the very first time he read her research, years before that night, in years before Hannock House and William Hart and broken shoes and super glue and Saturday nights that changed everything. He had known exactly who Serafina Blake was. He had simply been waiting for the rest of the world to find out. Outrow. This story is not just about one night in a restaurant. It is about something much bigger. It is about what happens when someone decides they will not let the world shrink them. When someone chooses to stand tall even when everything around them is trying to push them down. Real power is not about how much money you have. It is not about your title or your suit or how loud your voice is. Real power is who you are when no one is giving you credit. It is what you know when everyone assumes you know nothing. Do not judge a person by where you find them, because nobody knows what tomorrow holds. The woman taking your order might have a PhD. The man cleaning your office might speak 5 languages. The girl behind the counter might be one decision away from changing the world. Serafina did not fight back with anger. She fought back with knowledge. And that is the one weapon no one can ever take from you. She did not just win that night. She got her voice back. She got her mother back. She got her life back. And William Hart, the man who thought he could erase her, lost everything. Not because someone punished him, but because his own arrogance destroyed him. 6 months after that night, Serafina stood on a TED Talk stage in Chicago speaking about financial inclusion and the power of knowledge to both oppress and liberate. And in the front row sat Arabella Blake, beaming with pride. Wearing the dress Serafina had bought her with her very first paycheck from the foundation. And somewhere in the back of the auditorium, Dr. James Holden smiled quietly. He had known all along. And please never ever sleep on the quiet ones.